Child safety and the protection of young people is a massive issue in our modern society. It has emerged in recent years as an overarching consideration in policy development for all organisations dealing in any way with children and young people. The whole point of this focus on policy and procedures is to help create a network to reduce risk of harm to younger members of our communities, sort of like a safety net. Understanding the role you play in this network is an important consideration for anyone working with children and young people, especially when responding to any who are at risk of harm or experiencing harm. Let's have a look at this complex area for a few minutes.
I know this world ain't perfect, but you remind me.
Identifying and responding to children and young people at risk of harm may involve recognising that a child or young person is at risk or already experiencing some kind of harm, and then being able to do something about it, preventing the actual harm from occurring or recurring. In order to be able to do this, we first need a clear understanding of what constitutes harm.
The Child Protection Act of 1999 defines harm as any detrimental effect of a significant nature on the child's physical, psychological or emotional well-being. For harm to be significant, the detrimental effect on the child's well-being must be substantial or serious, more than transitory, and must be demonstrable in the child's presentation, functioning or behaviour.
There are 5 broad categories of potential harm for children and young people. These are physical abuse, sexual abuse, emotional abuse, neglect and self-harm. It is important to note that any of these areas of harm may be a single incident or could be sustained over a period of time. In the end, the extent of the harm is irrelevant. When it comes to child protection, any child or young person who has suffered, is suffering or at risk of harm requires consideration, care and additional support as appropriate. Let's consider each of these briefly. Physical abuse is non-accidental physical harm or injury to a child or young person. This may be the result of actual intended harm, such as hitting, or could result from excessive discipline or unreasonable physical training or the administration of illegal drugs. Physical harm does not always leave obvious physical marks and instead can become evident through emotional or behavioural concerns instead. Sexual abuse involves an adult or older young person using their power to engage a child or young person in an activity of a sexual nature. Any child under 16 years of age cannot legally consent to sexual acts, even with other minors. Sexual abuse can be physical, or it can be emotional, or it can be verbal. The signs of sexual harm and the ongoing consequences and risks for children and young people can be very complex. Emotional abuse can be more difficult to observe and define because it deals with the emotional, cognitive and intellectual aspects of young people. It recognises the importance of psychological nurturing. Abuse occurs when a child's development is threatened or damaged by ongoing criticism, rejection, teasing, demeaning or exposure to domestic violence. Neglect is the ongoing failure to provide a child or young person with the basic necessities of life. Basic needs include food, housing, living conditions, health care, personal hygiene and adequate supervision. Neglect may include failure to use available resources towards needs of a child or failure to seek treatment or assistance for a child. Self-harm is different from the other forms of harm discussed so far, as the individual inflicting the harm is the child or young person themselves. This is often done in secret and without anyone else knowing. Common self-harm methods are cutting, burning and ingesting toxic substances, and these may provide obvious signs but not always. Self-harm is usually a response to distress, and while people do not necessarily mean to kill themselves, it often becomes a dangerous and compulsive behaviour.
For each of these areas of harm, there are often signs and symptoms that give an indication that something is wrong, such as significant changes in behaviour or new and unexplained injuries. Sometimes, however, it is not through observations that harm becomes evident, but direct disclosure.
There would be reasonable grounds to suspect harm if a child or young person says that they have been harmed, someone else says that harm has occurred or is likely to occur, a child or young person says they know someone who has been harmed, or the harm is directly witnessed. There is no one set of rules to follow when a child or young person discloses that harm has occurred. This is perhaps the most important element to note as a worker with children and young people. Though there are general agreed principles in Australia regarding harm, the parameters of how a disclosure should be dealt with varies greatly from state to state, in different organisations, and also different work roles within an organisation. For instance, the role required of a chaplain working within Education Queensland may be very different to that of a worker at a youth shelter or director on a children's camp.
Above all, you must understand what your responsibilities are within your specific work role and what policies and procedures you are accountable to and for. This will inform your immediate response to any disclosure and the thereafter. It is imperative that anyone working with children or young people undertake some research and training in order to comprehend the sensitive and complex area of harm.
Ask yourself a couple of questions now. Do I know my responsibility in my current work role if a child or young person disclosed harm? What should I say? What can't I say? What should I do? Who should I tell? How does my responsibility change if I am in a different role, such as a volunteer at my church or on a camp?